Hey, yeah, we're putting an antenna on the hot rod today on KM6LYW radio. This is a show about amateur radio or digital radios with an emphasis on digital or data modes, moving data back and forth. We're not going to do data modes today. We're going to do NMO mounts. This is how you put an antenna on your car. If a little bit of effort, you can actually do it without doing any drilling. Putting an antenna on a car like that is kind of a sin. So that antenna was actually attached with no drilling, no modifications whatsoever. It's completely reversible, and it works at 200 kilometers per hour. I don't know the math. What's this? 220 or so miles per hour. So, and it doesn't fly off. So let's do an NMO mount on a vehicle without doing any drilling. I mean, normally I think people expect, like what you normally would see is someone drilling a 3/4 inch hole through like the center of the roof and then putting one of these antennas on top of that mount. This is the NMO mount over here, and then the antenna screws onto the top of that, and there's a bunch of sheet metal between this clamp and the top of the mount, and then of course the antenna's on top of that, and then the wire runs through your car somehow. I don't know. It just doesn't seem stable enough for me. I mean, they work all the time. This is what police and first responder units use all the time. They're pretty standard. But I didn't want to put a big hole in the race car. The wife's looking at me like, you're really gonna put a radio in the race car. It's like, no, it's just gonna be temporary, and I can remove it whenever I want. So NMO mounts. Let's put one on the race car without doing any drilling today. Let me make me a lot smaller. So what I discovered, and actually I didn't discover this, some other folks discovered this, and it was pretty cool. If you go to Home Depot, let me see if I can bring this up here. Home Depot has something, and this is like a home supply parts warehouse for those of you outside of the Americas. You can get something called an 18 or 16 gauge galvanized strap. Okay, this is it. This is going to be our mount, and we can use this instead of drilling holes in our car. You see, we've already got a hole that's kind of big enough here for an NMO mount. In fact, when you're at the home supply store, also get a drill bit that's 3/4 inch. This is a chamfer or a countersink bit, and then we can widen out this hole right here, make it 3/4 inch, and then you can bend this thing up however you want and attach it to your car in a way that's somewhat reversible. Now, if you look like at the edge of a hood, they'll have a thing called a lip mount that will clamp onto the hood material of your car. If you've got like a satin paint finish or something, it's going to leave a mark. It's going to mar. Maybe you don't care about this, but in this case, I just couldn't put a lip mount on there. What I did do is just open the trunk and just to see, what I could work with. If there was anything there I could use to clamp this thing in or attach this thing to the car. So again, a 16 gauge galvanized retrofit strap tie. It's a Simpson strong tie. You can buy them. They're only like $2. I don't know where the price is on here. This is like $2 US. So you can actually get an antenna mount for $2 if you get it at the hardware supply store. So this is it here, all bent up. And now the reason I bent this all up, let me see if I can fast forward, is because I found this spot where I could like jam in the 16 gauge material into this mounting hardware that's used for the hinge for the rear, for the trunk on the car. So this is the trunk of the car, and then there's this basically a slot. If I backed out these screws, I could actually slip this right in here. And of course I got it all masked up, so I'm not going to be scratching up the paint. So I'm going to slip that in there, and I bend it up just perfectly so it fits, it protrudes out through the trunk and the fender, which it only gives you maybe 1/4 inch of clearance there. So check your clearance first. But again, this is 16 gauge material. The thickest part that's going through there, honestly, is the RG58 antenna material. So and of course, when it's done, this is pretty much what it looks like. So I had to bend this all up so it would fit through these little, go into the slot here where I can basically clamp it together, and then go up here, and then there's a little bend exactly where I needed to be so it would protrude between the fender and the bumper. And then you can see here it actually deforms the RG58. So that's all of the space I had, and I didn't want to touch any of the paint. I had to make sure nothing got scratched. I had to waterproof the whole thing because normally the undersides aren't waterproof either. So just a quick run through on the process. So this is the mount. Actually painted it black, so it would look cool and stuff. Deburred it, had to take off all of the scratchy parts, round off all the corners. And so this is kind of a before and after. We got the strapping material here, and then after I bent it, I didn't have like a sheet metal brake or anything. I just used a vise and some muscle, and this material is able to bend. Yet when it's on the car, it's pretty darn sturdy once the material is that short. And I was able to cut it up with a hacksaw. This is it here. I actually removed a lot of these burrs so they wouldn't chew up the cable. This is kind of our parts list. So the antenna is crazy small. So this is a 12-inch NMO mounted antenna by Comet. This is the B-10 NMO antenna, and I'd like to thank Ken and Aaron and Jim, I think, at the Ham Radio Outlet in Sacramento. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate the help with this. So we're going to put this NMO, the shorty little antenna. It's not even a quarter wave. In fact, this is probably like a zero gain, maybe negative gain. I don't know. It might even be base loaded. I don't know. The Q factor on the antenna was a little tight. The SWR at the end of the curves was a little high. But and then I also got a Larsen NMO mounting kit. Just I know they're a little more expensive. Everything's made in the United States here. This is really high quality stuff. So the NMO mount itself is a Larsen. And the NMO, I don't know if I have any good pictures of that. An NMO mount looks like this. I think I showed this to you guys. Yeah, so going back to this. So this is the stuff you need. The one thing you don't use is this Henry wet patch. I don't know why I grabbed this. This was a petroleum-based sealant, because I need to seal the bottom of this thing, this NMO mount. And I actually used this initially. And I was thinking it was rubberized. It's probably polyurethane. It wasn't. It was an oil-based sealer. So do not use this wet patch stuff. Instead, use this polyurethane. This is what you're looking for, polyurethane. I'll make my mouse do something cool. This is compatible with the plastics of the NMO mount. It'll be sealed forever. You can use it for anything. It's fantastic. It's not just for sealing up your gutters and fixing your roof. So polyurethane sealant, you're going to want that. This is just another close-up shot of the trunk. I just backed out these two bolts here. Actually, I should paint those again, and then slipped the strapping material into there. This is the angles I had. This is like when I put the bad sealant on there. This is what it looks like. This is the NMO mount that I bought from Larsen. Honestly, I had to. It's like I thought about it. It's like, man, I can't leave that on there. So removing petroleum-based sealers requires mineral oil and alcohol and a toothbrush and a lot of patience. So I had to remove that sealant off of there. That was a bummer, and then put the polyurethane on there. So when you're looking at the bottom of the NMO mount, that's what this is here. This is, of course, after I opened up that hole with this 3/4 inch drill bit and deburred it and painted it. Make sure you scratch up this area here and here, because there's the little claws. There's claws on the bottom that grab into this. See these claws here? Those will be on the, make sure these claws here are actually touching real metal, because you really want a good ground plane, or these antennas are not going to be resonant. You're going to have an high SWR. And then again, make sure that this bar itself is actually kind of, don't paint all the way down to the bottom of it. Let me go back here. Don't paint this. I actually scraped this up a little bit before I wedged it into the car. So make sure that has a reasonable amount of metal touching metal when it comes to installing it in the car. All right, so moving forward, that's like putting on the wrong sealer on the bottom of that. That was a whole evening. All right, so we got the bottom scratched up here, so our NMO mount will function. One thing that was really peculiar is, to me at least, and I've screwed this up multiple times, is you make a 3/4 inch hole, and then you discover that the actual NMO mount this disc doesn't fit through the hole. It's not supposed to go through the hole. In fact, it's supposed to be, the disc is bigger than the hole. What you're supposed to do is run this wire through the hole first, from the top. Run the wire through from the top, and then the NMO mount will kind of lever into that hole. And that disc isn't designed to go through a 3/4 inch hole. In fact, it keeps it from falling through, I guess, if you're installing it in a car. So that's how you do an NMO mount. This is it with it kind of mocked up, and it's actually clamped in. And I was able to do some initial testings. Initial SWR readings weren't fantastic. I tried some different moving the cable around. This actually made it worse. I actually ran the cable through here. So the cable was active, that I noticed. If I move the cable the feed line, I would get different SWR readings, so indicating, I've probably got a bad match, and I've got RF on the feed line itself. This is just a close up here, and it wasn't touching the car at all. The only place it's touching the car is right here, and then I've actually got some double-sided foam tape to keep it from, and it's torqued in pretty good. It's leaning hard. It wants to bend into the car, so it's just not going to move. And then the foam tape keeps it from touching any paint at all. So this is completely reversible. I can totally remove this, and no one would ever know it was there. This is showing it that we've got clearance. You can see clearance under the NMO adapter and the paint. So again, didn't modify the car at all. In the end, like I said, when I had bad SWR, what I did is I just put an RF choke right here and then wrapped it around once. This cleaned everything up. I couldn't get it as close to the feed point as I wanted to, but it still worked. And then of course zip tie this, put a little bit of dielectric grease right on the cable itself, so when the trunk came down on it, it wouldn't gouge the cable. It would just pinch it a little bit. And once that cable deforms once, it's kind of done deforming. So yeah, it sucks. You have to pinch the cable a little bit, and maybe that screwed up my SWR. Maybe it's not quite 50 ohms there anymore. That's certainly a possibility. And then of course zip tie this to make it nice. And I didn't drill anything to put the cable in the car. I just ran it through the boot here. It's a squishy spot on the hood. Hopefully no water gets in there. And then the SWR readings, they're not good, guys. They're not great. So if you put like a quarter wave or half wave on your car, you're going to get pretty good SWR. So the car is really the bottom half of the antenna. It's the ground plane. So if it's on the center of your hood, you got a great ground plane in all directions, you get good SWR. But if it's on the fender, it's going to be less good. It's still going to totally work. It's not going to be one-to-one match through the entire band that you're looking for. In fact, these are the SWR readings that I had. I had, and these weren't this. These are considerably higher before I added the choke, the RF choke. So at the very bottom at 144, I got 1.5 to 1 SWR, 1.5. Feasible. If I see 1.5 on an antenna, that's good enough. You're only losing maybe 6 or 7% of your signal in reflection. So I think that's cool. A lot of radios will start throttling back their transmission power at about 1.8 to 1. So if you're at 1.8 to 1, see if you can do something about it. If you're at 1.5 or under, you're going to be okay. So this is at the very bottom of the spectrum. So this is this is the 144, and we're gonna go through 145, 146, 147, and 148, and we're gonna see that parabolic and inverted parabolic curve, hopefully, with the SWR reading. So at 145, we're down to 1.4 to 1, so it definitely meets my requirement of being 1.5 or under. I think this is where the antenna was basically resonant. And normally, a lot of people say we got 144 to 148. And then everyone's like, well, make sure it's resonant in the middle on 146. I kind of reject that. I like it resonant at 145 because if you look, how often do you actually transmit at the high end of the VHF spectrum? I know I don't. And again, if we're doing digital modes, packet, APRS, for example, that's at the low end. So APRS is way over here at the low end. So I kind of like the resonance to be right about 145 at the lower half of the VHF spectrum. So again, we are at 1.4 to 1 here. I am totally cool with that. At 146, we're back up to 1.5 to 1. And then 147, we're at 1.7. This starts where it starts to get a little dodgy, but I usually don't transmit between 147 and 148. And then, of course, at 148, we're all the way up to 2 to 1. This is actually a little over 148. And again, this is usually wasn't where I transmit. Most of our repeaters are on the lower end. So I was actually really cool with this. I did shorten the antenna. It was resonating a little below, like at 144. I took about 2, maybe 3 millimeters off the antenna. That is cool that the antenna is adjustable. There's a little Allen wrench right here, so you can pop the radiant element out, cut it off. Man, this stuff is tough. I had to use a hacksaw to take off 3 millimeters, reinsert it, snug up the little grub screw, and that moved up the resonance about 1 megahertz. So it went from 144 to 145. So I was totally cool with that. And it might just be because this isn't actually on the car metal, it's on that mounting hardware that we had. So this might be a little high. I don't know, I'm just speculating there. So 148, this thing's a little high. It went from 145 to 148 with the lowest SWR being 1.4 to 1 at 145 megahertz. Did I get that right? So it was 1.5 at the bottom, 2.0 at the top of the spectrum, and then resonant at 1.4 to 1 at 145 megahertz. And this is kind of it when it was done. I was totally stoked with this. I got it zip tied on there. I've got the sealant, the proper sealant, the polyurethane sealant on there. I did put a gasket on here just to make sure no water can get in and out of this. And yeah, this Comet antenna really worked well. This worked so well, I actually did it on the RAV4 also. Now the RAV4 is a hatchback, right? So it doesn't have this trunk hinge thing that I could leverage. But what it does have is let me see if I can find it. It has a spare tire right here. So I totally took some of this strapping and bent it up so it would be crushed by the spare tire mount. So I got this antenna on the back of the RAV4 above the spare tire. The only problem with it being above the spare tire is there's no ground plane. And I was really bummed. The SWR was off the hook with this. It's just a tram antenna, very similar design antenna. And I'm using the exact same strapping material. So if you notice right here, there's I snuck in some whiskers on here. There's 3 20-inch pieces of 14 gauge copper wire, electrical wire that you'd buy at the hardware store. And I strung those out and I snuck them under the cover for the spare tire. And the SWR immediately came down really low. This is like 1.3, 1.2 to 1. So this is more of a full size antenna to this tram antenna. So it wasn't compromised to begin with. So those whiskers were necessary. So if you're putting this over the spare tire, I know a lot of guys on Jeeps, traditional Jeeps, off-roaders will want their amateur radio antenna kind of over the spare tire and not on their fender, even though the fender is probably a better place. Put some whiskers on the bottom of that mount. So I just drilled an additional hole and I just tightened some whiskers to the bottom of that, and then I fed the whiskers under the tire cover so you can't really see them. They're there, I mean, if you look for them. But I thought this was pretty slick. This is the wife's car too. So this is the XYL's car. So this had to be legit. I mean, I couldn't be cutting up the RAV4. And she wanted to be able to back this out if we wanted to get rid of it or put a little cover on it. She has her license, so she does use the radio. So this worked out really well, pretty stealthy. Again, these are the wires and the whiskers here. And this is it. This is the RAV4 using the strapping material that was $2 at the hardware store, at the home improvement store. And it totally made NMO mounts for both cars without modifying or drilling the cars at all. So I was really happy with these, and they're working great. Back on the race car, APRS is working. I'm making 6 miles out to the repeater, no problem. The last report was like 90% into the repeater at 6 miles, and that's through terrain, that's through trees. I live in the country here. Everyone here in the mountain lives in holes, so it's always tricky. So I was really happy we could get the race car up on the radio, and I'm just using an HT with this thing. I don't have a real radio in the car, so this was only 5 watts. So when I'm talking about those signal reports, this is just with an HT plugged into it in the center console. So this is ham radio at 200 kilometers per hour. Thank you guys. I need to get it out to the airport. I haven't actually got it up to 200 kph. There's an airfield nearby, of course. Don't do 200 kilometers per hour on the road, but yeah, you should be able to operate ham radio at 200 kilometers per hour. Just focus on the road, okay, guys? All right, thanks for hanging out with me. I want to thank the guys who make all of this possible. Patreon.com/KM6LYW. Do like and subscribe. We've got like 1,500 subscribers now. Lots of subscribers. This totally blown me away, the support here, guys. Patrons not only support the channel, but they also get access to the DigiPi SD card image. It's a little Raspberry Pi SD card. You put it in a Pi, you connect it to your radio, and it gives you access to every data mode there is. It works with USB-based radios really well, and we've also got wiring diagrams if you want to use an audio card and hook that up with a traditional dual bander rig, in your car or something like that, FTM 400. So that is the DigiPi. Every patron gets access to the DigiPi SD card image. Thank you guys. Fu, Steve, Mark, Ryan, Brian. I'm not expanding your name. I hope that's okay, Brian. If you've got a funny name, I'm probably going to read it here. Jake, Christopher, Ian, Tony, Michael, Jim, Brad, Simon. Thank you guys. Robert, Aaron, Bradley. Hey, Ken down at HRO. Thank you for helping out, Ken. I'm sure your name's on this list here somewhere. Thanks for supporting the channel. It really is cool to see these awesome amateur radio luminaries out there that are supporting KM6LYW radio. I pretty appreciate it. Craig, Larsen, Mike, Ken Gifford. Is that you, Ken, at HRO? I didn't get your last name, Ken. I'm sorry. I'm trying to remember your call sign. I can't either. Thank you, Ken. Ziggy Zog, Douglas, Lon. Thank you, Martin, France, Clayton, Robert, Jane, Kevin, Carl, Thomas, Alex. Wow, there's hundreds of you guys now. This is ridiculous. This is getting ridiculous. This whole thing really blew up in my face. This whole amateur radio thing on YouTube. So okay, guys, thanks so much for the support. I really appreciate it. Let me know how your NMO mounts go. Did you drill into your car? How did that go? Did you get a good SWR? Are you using a compromised antenna? What are the gotchas? I've only installed 2 of these. That doesn't make me an expert, but I was just really stoked to be able to install them without drilling into like a brand new car. So that's what this is about. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with me. My name is Craig, KM6LYW. I'm in California, and I'm clear.